Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this afternoon. It's great that so many of you have joined us for this short webinar today. There are going to be a few polls throughout the webinar, and I've tried to make it a little bit interactive. So the first thing I'd like you all to vote on is the status of second language. Does second language mean second class? True or false? Just tell me what you think.
So it looks like we're almost at 50% of the vote. So it looks like most people are voting false. Some have voted true.
Great. Thanks. We'll move on. That's really interesting. I'm glad that not too many of you have voted true, but this is what we're going to be thinking about today. Why second language is important and doesn't at all mean second class. So moving on. Here we go. So we're all very familiar with these terms. L1 means first language, L2 means second language, bilingual means able to speak two languages, and multilingual means able to speak more than two languages. And we all use these phrases and terms every day without really giving them very much thought or consideration. So the first thing I'd like to do is to look at some case studies, because actually the real situation is a little bit more complicated than these neat terms might suggest. So use your chat box. Tell me what Jonathan's L1 is. He was born in London, he went to school in London, he lives and works in London, and he studied Spanish at school. Use the chat box to tell me what his L1 is. This is really straightforward. This is a very clear-cut case. Are we getting any answers, Charlene?
Yes, so it looks like we've got English, Spanish, L1, English, L1, English, English. So it looks like majority are English here.
Great. And that's absolutely correct. He's an L1 English speaker. He's only ever spoken English. He studied a bit of Spanish at school. We have no idea how good his Spanish is, but he's an L1 English speaker. Great. What about Lisa? What's her L1? Lisa's more interesting. She's only 4 years old. She has an Italian father and a German mother. She speaks Italian with her dad and German with her mum. What's her L1?
So it looks like we have German, bilingual, German, Italian, bilingual. It looks like most people are going for both languages.
Which is absolutely correct. She's truly bilingual. She's learning to speak Italian and German at exactly the same speed with her parents. So she's truly bilingual. She's lucky she has 2 L1s. What about me? Born and brought up and educated in the UK. I studied French at university. I lived and worked in France for 2 years at different times. Now my L1 is English. How would we describe my French? What would you say my French is like? Would anybody like to put what they think in the chat box?
They're voting for L2, it looks like. A strong
Great.
L2.
Strong L2. Am I bilingual?
Some people have put bilingual, but then some people say no. Majority no.
Great. We don't actually know. You don't have enough information to know how good my French is at the moment. When I was living and working in France, I was definitely bilingual. And at the end of each of the 2 years I lived in France, French was my dominant language and I was very comfortable speaking it. And I moved back to the UK being fully bilingual. But now, having been out of France for several years, my French is not bilingual anymore. It starts to come back when I go on holiday, but I'm not bilingual anymore. But I was at one point in my life. Now, here's a really interesting example. The next 2 examples are not made up. They're real people who I've had the pleasure to meet and know and call friends. Canav, what's his L1? Born in Delhi to well-educated Hindi-speaking parents, grandparents spoke to him mostly in Hindi. Parents spoke to him in a mix of Hindi and English. At age 3, started at an English medium kindergarten where all communication was in English. Studied in English medium schools, went to university, did his bachelor's degree and his master's degree in the US. Works for a US bank in Delhi where he speaks English all of the time. What's his L1? We're doing this as a poll, so Charlene will put the poll up. You can see your options are Urdu, English, Hindi, and Sanskrit. What's his L1?
It looks like we're coming up, so people are voting. It was 50-50 on English and Hindi. Now it's going to more towards Hindi. So do keep voting. We'll leave it open for another 30 seconds. So please. We've reached 50% of voters. So I would say that Hindi is in the lead.
Great.
53%.
Excellent. That's great. That's absolutely correct. Hindi is his L1. But I have another question for you. No poll this time. Use your chat box. What is his dominant language? What is the language that he is most comfortable in and speaks most of the time? What's his dominant language?
It looks like they're putting English as the majority.
Yeah, which is absolutely right. So Kanav is an interesting example because his L1 isn't his dominant language. Kanav's dominant language is actually his L2. So he's a very interesting example. And we find millions of people like Kanav all over the world. They may have one L1, but their L2 may be their dominant language. Okay, last one. Charles, friend of mine from university. Born in Argentina to parents who'd emigrated from Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic as it was at the time and now. Brought up by a Spanish-speaking nanny from birth to age 3, and at age 3 he could only speak Spanish. At age 3 he moved to London with his parents. The nanny stayed in Argentina. He started speaking English. Parents didn't use Czech with their children. By the time he started school at 5, he could only speak English. What's his L1?
So we've got the poll going. There's more people voting quicker this time. It looks like the percentage is going up. It looks like we're leaning towards English. Spanish isn't far behind, but English is definitely winning here on the votes.
Okay, great. Let's stop it there. Spanish is his L1. What Charles is an example of is what we call language atrophy, which happens. It's fairly rare, but it does happen. It's possible for us to completely lose our L1 and for our L2 to move into that space. So L1 and L2, while they are useful terms, are not the complete picture of how we all speak and use language. What these examples tell us is that our L1 might not be our dominant language. When I lived in France, French was my dominant language, although English was my L1. That was only a situation for me for a short period of time. But for somebody like Kanav, his L1, Hindi, English is his completely dominant language all the time, every day. Charles shows us that we can lose our L1. This is called language atrophy. And as L2 learners of any language, we sit on a continuum and can move along this continuum at any point in our lives, given the different circumstances. We can move in and out of bilingualism. So we might be bilingual like Lisa, our earlier example, who's learning 2 languages at the same time as a child, or we could be bilingual like I was when I was in France, bilingual but having lost it more recently. So L1, L2, bilingual are useful phrases, but they're not the complete picture. Because we learn a language as an L2 doesn't mean we won't be any good at it, or that we cannot achieve the equivalent of so-called native speaker competency in that language. And our L2 can come to completely be our completely dominant language. So we have to be really careful. I find this a lot with teachers who struggle with parents who say, you must be teaching L1. Why are my children using L2 materials? I don't want L2. L2 is second class. We need to help parents understand L2 doesn't mean second class. It only means learned second after the first language. So how do we learn these languages differently? Well, there are a couple of theories about first language acquisition. I'm not an expert, but this is my understanding. Noam Chomsky and Steven Pinker believe that language and other knowledge structures are hardwired in our genes when we are born, that we have an instinctive knowledge of language and we have a rich structure of cognition already in place in our brains. An alternative theory is offered by Jeffrey Sampson, who says the structures of language are cultural creations. Sampson believes that language acquisition goes hand in hand with the development of the human brain. You know that when we're born as babies, we have brains with thousands, millions of neurons in. And as we're babies, our brains develop and we start to learn to make sense of our world. And we start to learn to do things physically. And Sampson believes our language skills are built as connections are built within our brain, and that language acquisition goes hand in hand with learning to make sense of the world. And to me, this is an attractive theory because I've observed this in my daughter. When my daughter was little, learning to speak, she would use what Sampson calls the guess and test model. So as a young child, as a baby, as a toddler, she would hear her dad and I talk. She would absorb that language and she would try it back. She would play it back to us, guessing where words would be used, testing it out, seeing if she got it right. So here's the next little quiz for you. In the chat box, tell me what you think my daughter's first word was. We were out one day, she was in her pushchair. A little dog like this came running towards us. She pointed at it and she said, what do you think she said? Remember, she's guessing and testing. She's listening, she's remembering the words that she's heard her dad and I say, and she's trying language out. We also learn in terms of hierarchies. So she's thinking small, cuddly, fluffy, bright eyes. What do you think her first word was?
So we've got doggy, bow wow, mama, dog, woof, woof woof, puppy, mama look, teddy bear.
Okay, mama looks great. That's a whole phrase. If she'd said that, she'd have been a genius. Teddy bear's almost right. She said teddy because she was used to hearing her dad and I talking to her and playing with her teddies. So this fluffy, cuddly looking thing with bright eyes and big ears comes running towards her. She's thinking in terms of hierarchy. To her, it's a teddy. She's guessing and testing. She's trying language out. She's not right, but she's not wrong either. And it demonstrates the Jeffrey Sampson theory that we learn language. Our language acquisition goes hand in hand with making sense of our world. So it's a nice observational example. So first language acquisition is woven into the development of the human brain and our development as people and our development of our social and cultural identity as we start to learn who the people around us are, how they are important to us, what our world looks like, our language acquisition is happening at the same time. We learn our language through modelling from our parents and the people we hear talking around us, our grandparents, our siblings, our friends. We're not making a conscious effort. We're not sitting there as a 3-year-old thinking, I must learn this list of idioms. We don't need to make a conscious effort. We're naturally absorbing the language that we hear around us. And we develop what's called an internalised knowledge of how language works. Unlike Noam Chomsky, who thinks we are born with this, Jeffrey Sampson would say, no, we're learning this as we're learning to make sense of the world. So we know what's rude, you know, what correct language is. We know when to use idiomatic expressions and what they mean. We have a natural pronunciation. We understand cultural context of words. We understand metaphor, collocations, non-verbal features of language. We know what a shrug means. We have fluency. We understand rhythm, stress, and intonation, and we can code switch. And code switching is a really important language feature. Code switching means when we're out with our friends, we use a different kind of language and a different kind of vocabulary to the language and the vocabulary we might use when we're talking to our boss at work. So all of these language features develop as our brains are developing. Whereas with second language acquisition, we have to make a conscious effort. It's learned as a language after we've learned our L1 natively. We're making a conscious effort. Our proficiency can vary, can be won or lost through practice or lack of. And we don't have that internalized knowledge of how the language works. As learners, we need to actively learn when to use idioms, what language may be correct in different situations. We have to learn about pronunciation. We have to learn cultural context. We have to actively learn collocations. When I was in France, a shrug is different and it doesn't have the same meaning as a shrug in English. I had to learn that. We have to learn about rhythm, stress, and intonation and code switching. So let's have a look at some examples. In the chat box, can you please write one very simple sentence using the verb and preposition pick up? We'll just give you a minute to just jot into the chat box a quick sentence using pick up. Anything you like.
I pick up my toys. I went to a bar to pick up a guy. Pick up the blanket. We pick up the rubbish in school. Pick up Teddy. Pick up your clothes. The driver has not picked up. Oh, it's going too fast for me, sorry. The driver has not picked up my freight from the depot. Can you pick up some food on the way home? The car picks up the passenger. I pick up great reading stuff while traveling. Pick up the bits of paper from the floor. I'll pick you up from the bus station. He picked up Spanish when traveling.
Great. Excellent. So we've got lots of this kind of example. Pick the book up, pick up the book, physically lift something up. We had a few examples of pick up a child from school. We had pick up some food on the way home. And we had pick up information, pick up a language. What we didn't have, or what Charlene didn't read out, is this. She's had COVID, but she's picking up now. So picking up in this context means getting better. Phrasal verbs are one of the things that as learners we struggle with, and we really have to make an effort to learn. And as you all know, a phrasal verb is a verb and an adverbial preposition, often with a meaning that cannot be guessed from the sum of its parts. So pick a child up from school, a car picking somebody up from their house, a taxi cab picking someone up to take them to the cinema. That's okay. We can learn that one fairly easily. Pick up some food on the way home. That's got a different meaning. That means buy. Pick up information. Pick up things from reading books. Pick up a language. That means learn. Pick a guy up in a bar. Well, I wouldn't be encouraging any of that at the moment, given that we also have picking up meaning to improve, to get better from after a bout of illness. So phrasal verbs are one of these language features that as L1 English speakers we have as part of our native store of language, but that as learners we have to actively learn. And they're difficult for three reasons. They have difficult grammar. Where does the adverbial particle go? In pick up. Does it always go next to pick? Can you put something in the middle? So they're difficult because of their grammar. The meaning is difficult. They're often idiomatic. You cannot work out what they mean from the words that they're made up from. So picking up after a nasty bout of flu means improving, getting better in health. It's got nothing to do with taking something in your hand and raising it up. And what we often find is that L2 speakers of English often use the single word synonym that is available to us as an alternative to the phrasal verb. And the use of these single word synonyms is a bit of a giveaway in an exam situation. If an examiner sees in an IELTS exam the word flee instead of run away, that is a giveaway. The problem we have with these single word synonyms is that they are at a different register level to the phrasal verb. So run away is neutral, flee is slightly more formal. So they're difficult to learn, and we actively have to learn these if we're learning English as our second language. They're idiomatic in meaning, and English, as everybody knows, is full of idioms, and we can't work out what these idioms mean from the sum of their parts. As native speakers, we learn these as our parents and people around us are speaking. As L2 learners, we need to actively learn what they mean, learn what their register is, and learn how to use them. English vocabulary is tricky. In the chat box, can you please jot down synonyms for happy? Don't worry about listing three. Everybody just jot in a quick synonym for happy.
Gleeful, glad, astonished, gay, joyful, over the moon, merry, ecstatic, overjoyed, beyond cloud nine, elated, delighted, cheerful, excited, peaceful, content.
Okay, great. So lots of good, interesting synonyms there. But we have to ask ourselves, do these all mean exactly the same? Are these all used in the same context? So what we had were some of the ones that Charlene read out were gleeful, glad, joyful, merry, ecstatic. They don't all have the same weight. If you look at these synonyms from Collins English Dictionary, they don't all have the same weight. Thrilled is different to happy. It occupies a similar semantic space in that somebody is pleased about something, but thrilled carries connotations of being excited as well as being happy. Happy is much more neutral. You're not excited if you're happy. And if you're ecstatic, you're even more excited than if you're thrilled. So these are presented to us as synonyms, but the weight is slightly different. How happy we are and what our happiness is like is different depending on the synonym choice that we want to make. And if we think about something like on cloud nine, which is another one that you gave me, which is great, that's slightly more informal in feel than happy or delighted. And you can see here in this Collins Dictionary entry that we have cock-a-hoop, which is really old-fashioned. So English as well has a difficult vocabulary. Hundreds and hundreds of words that are synonyms that we as native speakers instinctively understand how they're used differently, how the connotations are different. But these, again, are things that we have to actively teach learners of the language, or they're not going to pick up the subtleties of language and could use an inappropriate word. So these are just some of the examples of internalized knowledge structures that L2 learners don't have. Here's another example: set phrases, structures, and patterns. These silly little things like question tags, yes I do, no I don't. We don't need to teach things like this to L1 learners, but we do need to teach them to L2 learners because they're idiomatic. They're used in language every day in English. Isn't it? Don't you? All of these annoying little structures that don't have any meaning and have very little active function in the language, but that are all an important part of our skill with the language. We have to teach L2 learners these. Here's another example. We're going to do this as a poll. It's a little gap fill. What verb would you put in there? You've got options: play, do, go, make. Let's see what you would vote for. This is an example of a typical verb structure. What verb collocates with swim in the sentence, I swimming every day?
It looks like majority is going to the word go. I go swimming.
Have we got any other options?
So 16 people have voted do, and 2 people have voted for play. No one has voted for make.
Okay, great. It is, of course, go, but you can see from the examples, the answers that we got, that this is another kind of structure that we have to actively teach students. You're not going to find this kind of content in L1 language materials because L1 learners don't need to be taught actively that we use go with words describing sports ending in ing, but we have to actively teach our L2 users. So you would find this kind of information that L2 learners need in materials especially written for them. These examples are from Collins' IGCSE English as a Second Language. Then we have appropriacy, what's rude in any given circumstance. But we're going to come on to the next poll. Native speakers also use things that are beyond the actual words to transmit meaning. So we're going to have a look now at intonation, and I'm going to play you a question and answer. So the question is, are you sure you locked the door? And the answer is yes. But we have 3 answers, one of which means I'm not sure, one of which means yes, of course, I'm not stupid, how dare you ask me, and one of which means yes. And the speaker is making the difference in meaning through intonation. And again, this is something that we as L1 learners will actively learn from our parents telling us off when we're little, but we have to teach L2 learners. So let me play this, and we'll do this as a poll.
Track 174, 2, 1.
Are you sure you locked the door? Yes.
2,
Are you sure you locked the door? Yes.
3,
Are you sure you locked the door? Yes.
Have we got answers, Charlene? Do I need to play it again?
I would play it one more time.
Okay. Sorry, I just need to move the chat box. Sorry, Charlene, I can't get it to play again because the chat box has come over the...
It's okay. That's okay. We've got votes coming in. So it looks like for...
Go on, yeah.
For the first question, sorry, I can see that some people have said that they can't see the answers. So if you can, Elaine, move the box to the left slightly.
Yes, I have. I can play it again. I've been able to do that.
And if you can move the the poll vote to your left as well, so they can see the answers. I don't know if you're able to do that. If you click it from the top of the box.
Is that better? So
no,
it's
we
just
still can't see
slightly
it.
long, isn't it? Hang on, let me see.
So the
Oh,
first,
there we go. How's that? Is that better?
no, we can't see it, but the first one says, I'm not sure. The second one says, yes, of course, I'm not stupid. And the third one says, yes. So let's listen to it one more time.
Yeah, yeah.
Track 174, 2, 1.
Are you sure you locked the door? Yes.
So that's C. 1 is number
2.
C.
Are you sure you locked the door? Yes.
So that's A. I'm not
3.
sure.
Are you sure you locked the door? Yes.
So that's B. So the answers are 1 is C. Are you sure you locked the door? Yes. Said with a neutral intonation, a neutral tone. That means yes. Answer number 2 was A. I'm not sure. Are you sure you locked the door? Yes. With a wavy tone. The speaker starts quite high up, drops her voice and raises her voice again. And then number 3, are you sure you locked the door? Are you sure? So number 2 was, sorry, I'm getting confused. Are you sure you locked the door? Number 2, yes, was angry. And number 3, yes, was B, the doubtful. So English speakers can use intonation to show meaning, and this is another thing that we have to learn. I think most people got that, Charlene, from the answers that you put up.
Yes, I think so. We were there.
Yes, great. So we as native speakers don't need to be taught about how yes can mean no and how yes can express anger, because we would naturally learn it as we're learning language, as we are learning about who we are and our place in the family and our place in the world. But we actively have to teach L2 learners about how intonation can impact on meaning and affect meaning.
Track 174,
Sorry.
2.
Oh. Great.
Track 100.
Okay, great. Apologies for that. Now, the next thing that we have to teach our L2 speakers is about all of the features of nonverbal communication that are important. So I studied French. When I went to France, I soon learned that a French shrug is very different to an English shrug and has a different meaning, carries a different way. An English shrug just kind of means, oh, I don't know, but I don't really care. A French shrug is much more emphatic. I really don't know, but we really need to sort this out. So there is a difference in meaning. And I've traveled a lot, doing lots of workshops in India. And one of the things that I had to learn within the context of my L1, even in India, is what Indian head shakes mean. So I'm just going to play you this video because this is a nice example of the kind of non-verbal communication that L2 learners need to be helped to understand. We're only going to look at a short bit of this. It's very interesting.
An Indian shakes his head in different ways when you speak to him. It could be like this, this, or this. What do they mean? If a person shakes his head like this, it means he's saying yes. Raju, did you milk the cow today? Yes can also be said like this. If a person moves his head like this, it means he's saying no. Raju, did you shave your beard today? If a person sways his head like this, it means maybe or may not be. Raju, did you delete the browser history? You did? You didn't? What? Doing the yes or
So the complicated one for me when I started traveling to India was the head shake at the end, because it can mean yes, but it can also be used as a very polite way of saying no. So I used to ask people questions and I would get a head shake back, and I would have no idea whether they were saying yes or whether they were saying just being very, very polite and saying no. This is another example of the kind of communication we have to help students of L2 really learn to use and to master. But we as native speakers learn naturally by copying the people around us, our parents, our friends, our colleagues, whoever it is that we are learning language from. And just as an aside, just another little example from my daughter. My daughter, when she was growing up, my husband and I both speak English, as you can hear, and we live in Scotland. And our daughter had two versions of the word no. So she would have the English version of the word no, which meant definitely not, because that's what she'd heard from her dad and I. But she also had a version of the word no that she said with a Scottish accent. Apologies to anybody listening from Scotland, I can't do this very well, but she would say no, and no did not have the same strength as no, even though it was the same word. So she was varying meaning through accent. So all of these kinds of things are things that we have to teach, L2 learners, that L2 learners have to actively learn. This is why books for L2 learners are full of this kind of content. You won't find this kind of content in L1 courses. If you're trying to teach L2 speakers and your school has said we're using L1 materials because L1 is first class, you're not actually giving your learners some of the content that they need to learn. You can see a course like this, which is the new Collins English as a Second Language course for lower secondary, has advice and learning material in here on intonation in questions, on use of idioms, on vocabulary and context, on communicating without words. You can see the picture over to the right of expressions and how that links to mood and feeling. We also have to make much more of an effort to actively teach the vocabulary students are going to need for other subjects they're studying in English. We have to help them with tone of voice, about how tone of voice can confer meaning or feelings. So we have to actively teach learners these kinds of materials. And if we think that in some way we are doing our learners a favour by giving them L1 materials to learn, then we're really in danger of missing out all of these important kinds of language features that L1 learners don't need to be actively taught. So, just to recap before we come on to the last couple of slides, materials for L1 learners tend not to cover the language skills that L2 learners need to be actively taught. So in many of the places that I visit, many of the schools I visit are using L1 materials in L2 contexts. So what is driving parents and school owners to keep saying L1 is better? We have to teach L1. L1 is what our parents want. They're paying a lot of money. We have to give them L1. What is driving this? And I've been digging into that, and I think it's this. I think it's partly led by a belief that L1 is going to help with university entry in English-speaking markets, that it is in some way better preparation for university. So if we dig into this a little more, what we find is that IGCSE English First Language and IGCSE English Second Language are both acceptable as part of the general requirements for entry to university. So a small junior college somewhere in the US will say, we'll accept you if you've got 5 A's at IGCSE. That can be English First Language, that could be English Second Language. They're widely accepted as general requirements for university entry, but they are not accepted as proof of language skills for university anywhere in the English-speaking world. Our small US junior college is happy to have 5 IGCSE English, 5 IGCSEs, one of which may be IGCSE English as a second language, but they also want an IELTS qualification. They want an IELTS score, or they want a TOEIC, TOEFL score, but IELTS is most widely accepted. So as well as IGCSEs and A-levels, depending on where our student is going, UK universities and universities all over the world want an IELTS score. Top universities want an IELTS score of 7 for undergraduate work, but there are lots of universities that will accept a lower score, 6 or 6.5. In the US, the majority of colleges are looking for IELTS 5.5. So our small junior college in the US wants 5 IGCSEs, a B or an A, but they also want an IELTS with a 5.5 average score, no less than 5 in any skill. Colleges in Australia and New Zealand are typically looking for 6 for undergraduate work. Canada's looking for 6.5. So you can see it's the IELTS qualification that is the marker of your ability to speak and use English. So the IGCSE English First Language isn't helping with that for the majority of universities. IGCSE English as a second language, grade B, is roughly around an IELTS 6. So actually, if your students are thinking, if the long-term game plan is to get a good university, a good qualification in your country, to go to university in the US or the UK or Australia, or Singapore or Canada, IGCSE English second language grade B is roughly around an IELTS 6. So it's going to keep you in line with where you need to be tracking for your IELTS score. And because IGCSE English as a second language addresses reading, writing, speaking, listening, and use of English, it's a much better preparation for the IELTS exam. IGCSE English first language is a fine exam, not necessarily if you're learning English as a second language. It's not going to be a shortcut to university entry. It's not going to help you in any way. And a bad result follows a student around. I've heavily anonymized this example, but this is a real example from a student at a really good school in Southeast Asia who got A stars and A's for IGCSE maths and science, but got a D for IGCSE English first language, and was made to resit it to get a better grade and got a D again. So very sadly, that D at IGCSE English first language is following that student around. If that student had done second language, then the mark would probably have been much higher. And if we're thinking about students who want to go and do engineering and law and science and medicine, then they don't really need to study a first language syllabus anyway. They need English for practical purposes and for academic skills. And that is much more delivered by an L2 curriculum and L2 materials. So our last vote, what does second in English as a second language mean? These are definitions from Collins English Dictionary. Number 1, coming directly after first in number or counting or order or position or time. 2, rated, graded or ranked between the first and third levels. 3, alternate. 4, additional. 5, resembling a person or event from an earlier period of history, a second Wagner. Or 6, of lower quality, inferior. What does second in English as a second language mean? Let's vote. Are we getting answers in, Charlene?
Yes, we are. They're coming through. We'll just give people a chance to select their choice. So if you just select the poll at the bottom in the middle of your screen, you should be able to then choose one option. It looks like we're getting to about 30% of people voting. So it's sort of a tie between number 1 and number 4. So coming directly after the first in numbering or counting order, position, time, etc., or additional, extra, a second opportunity. They're both at about 39–40%.
Great.
Try and see if we can get to 50% of people to vote, and then I'll share the results at the end. Oh, someone has said that it's difficult to read the options because of the grey box in the middle. I'm not sure what that is referring to, but I'm sorry if that appears. So if you go down to the poll, yes, that's correct. If you go and click on the poll on your menu at the bottom, you should be able to see all of the options to vote. Okay, so it seems like people have stopped voting, so I'll end the poll now and share the results.
Great, excellent. That's what I would have said, that the second in English as a second language just means coming after the first language, learned after the first language. I don't think number 4 is wrong, though. I think that's a fine second example, but I would certainly say it comes after the first. It certainly doesn't mean rated, graded, or ranked lower than first. And it certainly doesn't mean of lower quality or inferior. Great. So are there any questions or any comments, anything anybody would like to share? L1 materials are not written to meet the learning needs of L2 learners because L2 learners and L1 learners learn very differently. IGCSE English first language isn't a shortcut, so the language requirement for university entry in the UK, the US, anywhere. And IGCSE English second language, based around reading, writing, speaking, listening and use of English, is much better prep for IELTS and much better prep if we're thinking about a degree, a career in medicine or science or engineering. I think IGCSE English as a first language, focusing on L1 and L1 syllabus and L1 materials is really valuable if you want to study literature at age 16. But if that isn't your end goal, if your end goal is medicine and engineering, then an L2 syllabus is much more likely to give you the language skills and the language grounding that you need. So are there any questions, Charlene? I'll just put up the last slide.